Well, good evening, everyone. This is John Craig, and welcome to this edition of Walking in Spirit and Truth. And I'll be joined here shortly by my beautiful bride, Miss Sandi Craig, here momentarily. I wanted to go back and look at this scripture that was from Ezekiel chapter 36, considering everything that's happening in the world today. Uh, what I love about this passage is that it's so relevant to what's going on. So go with me over to, if you got your Bibles with you, to Ezekiel 36, beginning with verse 22. And it says, "Therefore say to the house of Israel." Of course, we all know who the house of Israel is. And we know that the northern kingdom was considered the house of Israel. The southern kingdom was the house of Judah. And and yet it can also speak to the entire northern and southern kingdom as well. But going on, it says, "Thus says Yahweh your Elohim, it is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am about to act, but for my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you went. And I will vindicate the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you have profaned in your midst. Then the nations will know that I am Yahweh, declares Yahweh Elohim, when I approve myself holy among you in their sight. For I will take you from the nations, gather you from all the lands, bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. It's just that very thing. And I've been talking about this at Life of Worship on Shabbat, and talking about how the corruption entered in to the assemblies there at the very beginning, within the first 3 centuries, and how things shifted so quickly because they lost some of these elements about the clean and the unclean, and how we are to be clean and we will be cleaned. And then it reminded me on Shabbat where Sandi had brought the kids out, and they all had these little yellow and orange and red little banner things that they were and they were supposed to be fire. And they were talking about the story of Elijah, who went up onto Mount Carmel. Why? To confront the idols of Baal. And of course, Baal could not light the altars, but certainly Yahweh did, and consumed it. Excuse me, it consumed it all up. And when I think about that, and I think about what the Father is doing, that purging is going to have to go on, because when we look at those pagan roots that created a whole new religion called Christianity, it was then the worship of Yahweh was substituted again with the golden calf. Or you can turn it around and say it was Baal worship, but they put the name Jesus on. And I just think about here in the near future, with all the things going on in the world, it's about a shift. It's about moving us. It's about uprooting us from our being comfortable where we're at, so that the only thing and the only one that we have to rely on is our Messiah, who's going to take us back to the very roots that he taught. And then he's going to, and it says, moreover, verse 26, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will be careful to observe all my ordinances, and you will live in the land that I gave to your forefathers. So you will be my people, and I will be your Elohim. And moreover, I will save you from all your uncleanness, and I will call for the grain and multiply it, and I will not bring a famine on you. And I think about how relevant that is today, things that we can be looking forward to. So just exciting. It's exciting to think that when we see world events going on right now, it's all about the great shift. They call it the great reset. I call it the great shift, by which Yahweh is going to be bringing his people from the four corners of the earth and restoring them to the land once more. And what a glorious time that'll be. And he says, even there at the end, when we're looking at grain famines going on right now, he says, I will call for the grain and multiply it, and I will not bring a famine on you. So
everyone, we have been studying Psalm 23, and we have been slowly going through verse 4. And tonight we're going to talk about I will fear no evil, or at least start that conversation. And I'm not sure that we're going to break it down into Hebrew tonight. We may do that next week because we're going to get some intro into that phraseology first. So with that being said, I want us to go ahead and turn into our scripture to Psalm 23, and we'll read verses 1 through 6. That way, by the time these shows are over, hopefully each and every one of you can say it by memory, and that is good. Store the word up in our heart.
A psalm of David. Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. There we go about that name thing I just read earlier. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou hast prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Yahweh forever.
All right. We know that. We've heard it. We've said it. And I want to focus in on fear, because fear is something each and every one of us deal with. And it says, I will fear no evil. And I want to just look at it from the perspective right now of how we may see it in general, or maybe not, and how we deal with it. But I want us to understand that fear actually profoundly affects the way our brain actually receives and processes images, the way it processes and does its work. Fear affects that. And this might explain some of the behavior we've seen of late throughout the world when we think about this, because the world has been moved through fear. It has been moved through the powers that be purposefully to extract that emotion within people, because scientifically they know that fear affects the way you think and affects the way you act, affects the way you process things. It actually even interrupts processes in our brains that allow us to regulate emotions and read verbal cues, nonverbal cues, and other information that it comes across our path. It blocks us from interpreting it correctly and reflect before acting and act ethically. All of that is affected by fear and how we respond. It actually impacts our thinking and our decision making. How? Very negatively. And it leaves us very susceptible to intense emotion and impulsive reactions. Now, I just want you to think about the events of the last couple of years and the events that are occurring now. Everything, this fear mongering has been consistent and persistent, and people have acted irrationally. People have acted out of fear and not trusting Yah. And this explains it. It actually disrupts us physically, how we think and process information. Fear can make you foggy because parts of your brain are shutting down, and some are revving up, some are shutting down. And then when the amygdala senses fear, the cerebral cortex, that area of the brain that harnesses reasoning and judgment, it actually becomes impaired. So you can't make good decisions. You are not able to think clearly. Wow. Does that say a little bit? Does that talk a little bit of what's happening in our culture, in and around us, even as we speak? When you think about that, it does. I know I've asked this question. That's not even logical. Why would they do that? Why would people react to that information? It doesn't make any sense. Well, this sort of helps explain it, doesn't it?
So I was just going to say, that's a tremendous point, because have they not kept everybody on their heels for the last, well, let me just put it in the more recent past. They've kept everybody on their heels with a sense for the last 2 years, where they started drumming up all the fear and the fear mongering because of a particular disease. And then they said, then they had all the fear mongering because, if you didn't take their protocol. And then they had the fear mongering that's really affected many people that are more conservative, maybe believers, that type of thing, where, oh, if we don't say the right things, or if we're in the wrong place or the right place, but at the wrong time, like, for example, on January 6th, we could be arrested, or, all of these different things. Like in Canada, those peaceful protesters, they were actually peaceful in Ottawa, and they were with the truckers and all of that. And many of those people are still in jail, just like the January Sixers. I mean, all of these things. Then we have now the Ukraine event, and 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 there's a lot of fear mongering that goes along with it, and it really people will really fall to that, and if they are not positionally in the right place, it's because I've been there. I have been when 2020 started and all that stuff was happening. We're watching people fall over the streets in China and all that. We're like, whoa, that's kind of creepy, and that's not good. And is it going to affect me? Am I shielded from it? Am I protected from it? I'm a believer. Am I covered by the blood? And then in March of 2020, I got sick, but I also learned, wait a minute, stop. There's nothing to be afraid of. And I had to go back and look positionally, where am I? And if I'm outside of the covenant, if I'm not in the right place, if I'm not in the shelter of the Most High, I'm in danger. But I also looked at it as, you know what? If I'm dead, I'm dead. But be absent from the body, I'm present with the Lord. So, all right. So I'm just going to live my life.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is, do we fear Yahweh or fear man?
Right.
Do we trust him or do we trust the words of men? It is work to fear Yahweh. How do I mean that? Because our natural inclination is to fear or listen to the voices that we hear and see every day, because we're not spending time hearing his voice every day. And so people naturally go to the news and go to the hearsay of others and listen to that information and those realities, rather than listen and go back to the word. And so there's a fear of man. And what is another issue is that because of fear actually affects brain development in kids. Yeah. When kids have chronic and intense fearful experiences, they lose the capacity to differentiate between threat and safety. And therefore, when there's not a situation, kids react maybe not as they should, because they can't differentiate that everything seems to be a threat.
Well, think about how these kids have been, that they're required to wear these masks. And then for 2 years, what does that do to some child that started wearing masks at age 3?
It keeps them in a constant state of fear.
Yeah. And then what's it do? There's all sorts of brain development issues. And if, from speech to understanding to growth to watching expressions to learning behavior and all that sort of thing, and that they won't know. And then it's going to affect their social interaction even as they grow, because it's formative. It's during these formative years. It is going to perpetuate one thing after the next. Kids are resilient. You got to pray for that. But,
but those open doors, John, those open doors, traumatic experiences can open the door for demonic oppression.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why traumatic events of our younger years so often have play on us, even as adults. And those things, we need deliverance, we need ministry, we need, sometimes people to help us let go of those things and understand them, because those traumatic events do affect us decades later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see even now. We see this, we see the brainwashing and that constant fear factor. If you're told you constantly need to wear why? Because the boogeyman's going to get you, so to speak, then those kids are living in this constant state of fear. They're going to perceive reality in a completely different way than any generation before them. and it's going to be skewed because
Yeah.
their reality again is going to be so off because they can't perceive the difference between safety and threat. They
You
won't.
know,
Go ahead.
that's such a good point, because I just remember as a child, I remember the phrase, the boogeyman's going to get you. And as a young child, so what did it make me feel? I didn't want to go into a dark room. I didn't want to go, I had to have the lights on. I think there was probably a time period that I probably slept with the nightlight in my room, uh, because of the boogeyman effect. And that is really true in terms of developmental patterns, because how long does it take for one to overcome that, to outgrow it, so to speak? Because I want to say this, do you ever feel that same way when you're walking into a dark house, going into a dark room, uh, during maybe during a thunderstorm, or into a dark place where you can't see, but it just doesn't feel right? It just, there's a little bit of anxiety going on. Where does that come from? Is there anything to be afraid of? Usually not. Probably 99.999% of the time, usually not, unless you live, in a really bad neighborhood, and but think about that, is where does it rooted from?
That's right. Well, there can also be discernment too, and some other things going on too, but
That's
that's a
yeah,
whole different subject.
that's another subject, but yeah, yeah, you're right.
Well, but fear also affects us physically because headaches can turn into migraines and muscle aches can turn into fibromyalgia. Body aches can turn into chronic pain and difficulty breathing can turn into asthma. And that's from Moeller. But here we have these ideas that there's physical ailments that are at the very least, exacerbated, if not created by fear. Fear and stress have this ability to affect your learning, that can affect your memory. It can affect all the processes of your brain. Memory of fearful events, oftentimes you'll remember those things because of the stress related hormones that are released. So those things are easy to remember. The good times, maybe not so much. But fear actually colors the way we see and the way we hear things. And since the mind and body are intricately interconnected, fear is the root of many physiological problems, even as much as heart disease and high blood pressure and clinical depression and other ailments. If they're not taken care of, then that fear literally can kill you. Now, in the word, we do see two kinds of fear. King Solomon wrote about the fear of Yahweh. What does it do? It adds days. Let's go ahead and read Proverbs 10:27 together.
The fear of Yahweh prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened.
If we have added days of our life, which included the appointed times and season, the Moedim, when the veil of everydayness is lifted, we can glimpse the sacred. What happens is you remove fear from your lives and you're going to see things a lot more clearly. You're going to experience them the way Yahweh meant you to experience them. When we are living in fear, it creates this friction, this dissonance that's around us and about us. And it literally shortens our life because we're dealing with stress and worry, bottom line fear. But fearing Yah and keeping his commands is what will bring forth life to us. And if we are keeping his commands and we're fearing him, that means we're trusting him, not the voices of men. So we're not fearing and fretting. We trust in Yahweh. We trust in him. Those words are so easily said, but in the reality, the second kind of fear is where we live, and that's the fear of man. The fear of man. And what does it say? Let's go to Proverbs 29:25 to read that scripture.
Reads, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in Yahweh will be exalted.
Okay. The fear of man is a snare. What do we see throughout the world right now? It is the fear of men and the words and the what ifs of society that men have told us we need to fear, just as you spoke of earlier. But it says, but whoever trusts in Yahweh will be made safe. But I would say there's a pandemic of the short of the lack of trust in Yah by believers, by those who proclaim themselves believers, Christian, Hebrew roots, otherwise, because the fear of mankind is a trap. And it's literally that kind of thing is slavery. Fear is slavery. But when we live in the light of Yah's presence, it becomes our food. It becomes our provision. It becomes our all in all. We can rest and relax. And remember, this whole psalm is about resting. It's about finding rest. What is our goal? Our goal is to find rest, and rest is Yeshua. Rest is Yah. And therefore we pursue him. We follow him so that we can rest. Do we rest when we're worrying and fretting? Ever? No.
No.
No, I'll tell you this. Sometimes John is working late, and I'm not fearing and I'm not stressing out about it, but I do get concerned because he works till the wee hours of the morning, then gets up early and goes and does the same thing again, and he needs to come and go to bed. So what happens? I sit there and I think about it, or lay there and think about it. So I end up going to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning when you do. Oh, because it's just those things are what's on my mind instead of just trusting in him. I'm just giving you an example. And we have got to learn to fear him and not fear man, not fear the circumstances around us, and just rest. We've got to believe that Yah is the miracle worker, and he is making miracles for us in this day, in this hour, and that we live in, that he is making ways where there seems to be no way, that he has got our backs. If we remember that, we're good. But instead, most of our negative emotions, what happens? Our negative emotions come from fearful thoughts. How many times have you seen somebody lash out in anger or begin to say, well, I don't even want to trust in Yahweh anymore or God anymore because da, 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 da. Well, if you go to the root of that, it's usually based in fear. I can't pay my bills. Why am I sick? Why haven't I seen God move? Who am I? Is there a God? Because these things haven't been done. These promises haven't been made manifest in my life. That anger and that resentment and that bitterness all comes from, if you look at it, oftentimes it's fear. His promises don't return void. He is the miracle worker, but it is all in his timing, and his timing is not our timing. And because of that gap between us standing on the promise and the full manifestation of that promise often results in that area where we are tested and tried. In that area we can be tempted to jump ship, so to speak, with God, with Yahweh, and try to find our own resolution and solution to the circumstances that we're in. And in the midst of that, it creates this seed of doubt. Is there really a God? Is there a God who loves me? Is there a God who trusts me, whom I can trust in? I don't see it, so I've got to do it myself. It's that period of testing from the promise to the full manifestation of that promise that gets so many believers. And
a lot of times we want to jump. We want to jump the period of testing, and we want to skip it. And the fact when we're in the middle of that, then of course we're going in the middle of that temptation, in the middle of the hard times, in the middle of the tribulation, when Yah feels distant to us, then those circumstances are overwhelming. The circumstances are disappointing, and we can't see the other end because we're in the middle of the tunnel. We've passed the lights behind us, and we've gone around a turn. We can't see it. We can't see the light of the end of the tunnel on the other end. It's just misery, and it's not daylight. It's not the sun shining. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we expected. It's not. And so then we're looking to someone to blame. So let's just blame the pastors. Let's blame the church. The church let us down. Let's blame, maybe this walk isn't a true walk. And, we'll list anything or any excuse that we want because our roots are shallow.
Oh, that's true.
And we're letting the cares of this world, that our roots went down in that rocky soil, and they're dry, and there's nothing holding on to it. And so when these cares of life and everything hits us, we find ourselves uprooted. We sprung up fast. We like what we heard. We love the messianic, the Hebraic roots. We love all that. But we forget that Yahweh wants us strong. He wants us
A bride
strong.
equally yoked. He wants to be equally yoked with his bride.
He needs us to be weathered. He needs us to have a backbone, not from our own physical strength or our emotional strength or anything like that. He wants us to have a backbone spiritually that we can perceive in the midst of the storm, not just see. We're always looking with our natural eyes. We're trying to look through through the natural circumstances and try to find that silver lining. There's nothing wrong with that. We ought to. We should look at it that way. But unless we can perceive, we will miss it. We will not find peace in the midst of the storm. If Yeshua is not invited into our boat in the middle of it, we're going to blame that all of the circumstances around us was a storm created by Yah. And when in fact he's the one that wants to be in the boat with us so it can be made still.
That's right.
We can use all those allegories, but the bottom line is he's trying to do something in us. He's trying to get some roots down. He wants us to be able to take a little bit of a zephyr, and then that up to the point of like we're having today in the Panhandle of Texas, these 30 and 40 mile an hour winds, and to where we will endure it because our roots go deep.
I believe what Hasatan tries to do is to get us to that point where we doubt his love, where we doubt his word, where we doubt his promises, because frightened people become unsettled. They get off balance. And that at that point, they're vulnerable to all sorts of ideas, manipulation, disease, sickness, deception. Fearful people are going to be deceived easily. Fearful people are going to get sick easily. They're going to be easily manipulated, and they're vulnerable to every attack.
Oh, that's a good point too. It puts off of let's put it into something that they have found in physics. Fear is a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And that frequency is not in harmony with the health of the human body. And so there needs to be shalom in the midst of that, because if that frequency goes too long, it does have an effect on the cells. It will cause cells to become abnormal. It can cause the heart to not perform like it needs to. It will create issues in the blood vessels, creating high blood pressure. It will cause, you've brought this up before, migraines. It will do all of these different things because we're out of harmony. We're out of sync. But the other thing is that it will seek to harmonize with other fear frequencies. In other words, as we've heard the phrase before, misery loves company. It's going to seek out others. I think about a young gentleman that's dealt with a particular issue, and he said time and time again, I want to be free of this. I want to be free of this. And yet he can go into a crowd of people and find the other people that are dealing with the same issues, and he's never known them before, and they're all cleaned up. He's all cleaned up, but he can find that person because there's a frequency. There's a demonic attachment. There is so you have a familiar spirit that recognizes and draws it together. And we have to fight against that. We can't let that. We have to be able to discern that. And that's why we go through these different storms, so that we can recognize when we're getting entrapped and we're being enticed and we're being deceived and we're brought into this place and our emotions get involved in it and we are weak. And honestly, we're looking for somebody strong that says, come on, snap out of it. Come on. There's more to this. Press in, draw near. James gives us in the Brit Hadashah, draw that when we draw close near to him, he will draw near to us. That's what Leviticus is all about. Vayikra, where it's about drawing near to his presence. And in the midst of life, it's busy.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of different distractions. And I'm going to say this, it's not all Hasatan. It's just because we live in life and we live in this world, and it's fallen, and there's issues and there's challenges. But if we didn't have that, we would not have a spiritual backbone to be able to grow, to be strong, to stand up against those winds of opposition.
All of that is so true, and we need to be able to stand up against the wind. I'm thinking of some of my plants that are enduring the wind. The little zephyrs they experience at one point will teach them to hold up to the strong winds that are coming, and it's the same with us. But we think of that trust that was really attacked, where fear was played upon, and it goes all the way back to Mrs. Adam, where she was tempted in the garden. Hey, if you don't eat, you can't do what you've been called to do and be the protector of your husband. And we're not going to expound upon that in this program, but Hasatan wants to play upon and take advantage of fear in our lives, or find that sliver, that door, so he can open it up. So when we think about fear, everybody's felt fear, from rich to poor, old and young, at one point in their lives. And fear by itself isn't actually even a sin, if we look at it that way. Because if we didn't understand the concept of fear, and I'm not talking about the fear of Yah, then how would we understand courage? How would we understand bravery? How would we understand being an overcomer or walking fearlessly? All of those concepts would have no value if the fear wasn't on the other side. But here's what matters. What we do in the face of fear determines whether we are commendable, whether we're worthy of honor, or are we cowardly and worthy of shame. What do we do in the midst of fear? How do we deal with it? Do we cast it all aside? How many times does Yah tell us, do not fear? So when that emotion pops up, do we dwell upon it? Do we womb it in our mind, in our heart? And therefore we will act upon it if we do that. Or do we immediately cast it aside and begin to build ourselves up in the word where he tells us not to fear? So the Hebrew word can actually be used as a verb, but once in a while it's actually even used as a noun. It can be used interchangeably to describe the fear of Yah or the fear of a particular circumstance. And we understand that the fear of Yah is the beginning of all wisdom, right? But we also read, because of the fear of the Lord, people begin to bear fruit in their lives, and because they trust, they reverence their God, our God, and they love their shepherd. They trust in him to lead them to the right place. Therefore, they can rest, which is what this psalm is about. One more time, we see this picture keep coming up over and over and over again. Now, we've talked about the shadow of death. We have talked about the valley itself. We've talked about that spiritual side, that part of us that plays a part in that. But also, our walk can sometimes have treacherous places in and of itself, where and what is our response? We should fear no evil, because even in the midst of our experience, if we have a declaration that I shall not fear, we're going to look and perceive our circumstances in a completely different light than if we are taken aback with the emotions of fear and everything that's opened up with those emotions of fear, where evil can come in. And think about that. I do believe fear allows evil to enter in and take control of every part of our lives if we don't prevail with his word, if we don't stand up in his word. Now, when you think about a valley that we've spoken of before, you've often heard me say, others say, we're not supposed to camp out there, right? Because the valleys are meant to cross through, to cross over in the absence of fear. No, in spite of the fear. You continue your journey in spite of fear, and that's called courage. That's called bravery. That's called standing upon the word. That when you're putting aside those emotions, when you're putting aside that feeling that tries to overcome you, what we do in the face of fear is what matters. How do we face it? How do we face that emotion? but how do we face the circumstance? Because we shouldn't be ashamed when we encounter fear, but we put it aside. We take our thoughts captive. We prevail. We begin to speak the word of truth that says, trust in the Lord in all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. We begin to speak that word forth. We declare it. We make a declaration, and literally our heart and mind will change as we do that. How do you think the martyrs of the past made it through the circumstances that they had to walk out in the face of torture, persecution, death? They found their strength and courage through him and trusting in him and trusting in his promises, regardless of the reality that they were faced with at the moment and that time. They knew that he is with you, with them. What is his promise? I will never leave you nor forsake you. Does never mean once in a while? Never means never. I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. And we've got to remember those words. We are at time, and I'm going to have to shut it down till next week, and we will continue this discussion. But let me encourage you today. Let's not walk in fear, but let's walk in faith. Let's heed his word where he says, do not fear, for he will never lead us, nor will he forsake us, and he is our rest.
That's right. Boy, okay. Well, I'd like to say some more things, but you're going to have to wait till next week.
Next week.
Good work, Sandi. Appreciate you bringing that this evening. And all right, so we're going to jump over to the Craig Report. Of course, it's not going to be here on YouTube or on Facebook. It's going to be over on the Lamb Network, lambnetwork.tv. So, all right, we'll see you on the other side for the Craig Report.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.